Okay, so for congruent polygons, we need to go over a few theorems or a couple of theorems as well. One of them is property of triangle congruence. We already went over the reflexive, the symmetric, and transitive properties of equality. Now we have each of those for triangle congruence. So notice we have triangle congruence is reflexive, symmetric, and transitive. When we were going over the reflexive property of equality, something like x is equal to itself. A number 5 is equal to itself. Kind of the same with triangle congruence. Any triangle ABC, is congruent with itself. Okay, for the symmetric property of triangle congruence, if one triangle is congruent to a second triangle, that second triangle is congruent to the first triangle. That's what this statement says. And then the transitive property of triangle congruence. So every single part you have to have correct. It's not the transitive property of equality because we don't have things equal here. We have things congruent. And then what we have congruent are triangles. That's why it's the transitive property of triangle congruence. If one triangle, like ABC, is congruent with the second triangle, a second triangle is congruent with a third triangle, then that first triangle is congruent with the third triangle. And then the other theorem in this section is what's called the third angles theorem. It has to do with the third angles of two triangles. Third angles theorem states the following. If you have two angles of one triangle congruent to two angles of a second triangle, see if you can figure out what would have to be true with those third angles while I'm writing a third angles theorem down. So I actually just wrote the third angles theorem in terms of a diagram. So what this is saying is if two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of a second triangle, then the third angles are congruent. And then I actually had this marked incorrect, so I'm going to change that. But I have these two angles in one triangle congruent to the two angles of a second triangle. Then really by the triangle angle sum theorem, the third angles have to be congruent. That's the third angles theorem. Okay, just in terms of a diagram instead of being written out in words.